Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Kedoshim, Tafshin Pei Beis. Excuse me. This week's Parsha are the mitzvah of Ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your friend as yourself. And I'd like to share with you some thoughts from the Michtav Milio. Michtav Milio was written by Rebbe Leo Dessler Zatzal, famous Musar work. Dessler passed away probably around 50, 60 years ago. And he has, in the collecting of his talks and his writings called Michtav Milio, a section called Kuntras HaChesed. We'll call that an essay on kindness. And he deals with a very interesting topic of giving and taking. And it begins that when Hashem created man, he instilled within us an inherent power of taking and of giving. Taking and giving permeates everything that we do. The trait of giving is actually a godly trait. Because, as the commentators write, why did Hashem create the world? He created the world lehetiv, to do good with it. Hashem has no need for a world. But Hashem, as the ultimate tov, the ultimate good, wants to share that good. And therefore, Hashem created a world to share his good with. So Hashem is the ultimate giver. So the trait of giving that's been instilled within us is a godly trait. It's a trait by which we emulate Hashem. Taking, on the other hand, is a very human trait and actually quite negative. Because the trait of taking is a trait that really says that whatever is within my reach, I want it. I want to take it. It's what we call selfishness. That's what the trait of taking really is. And it's really a trait that is the root of almost every, it's the root of all negative things. When you talk about taking in a negative way, you've got different types of takers. You have takers that take on the account of others, at the loss of others. Some of them are on a grander scale, like people invade countries. And then there's on a more personal level, but again, a level in which people steal and rob and cheat and lie. And these are people that are clearly taking in a way that damages people. And then you have takers that don't necessarily damage anyone. People who like receiving gifts or bribes. These are the kinds of things that the other person wants to give you. But again, you're taking, and you're very into that taking. And King Solomon wrote in Mishlei, Soine matanas yichya, he who hates gifts will live. If you like receiving gifts, that means you're very materialistic. And being very materialistic is not very helpful in the service of Hashem. Now, it doesn't mean you can never receive a gift. But it means that the idea of receiving lots of gifts is something that should be avoided. So giving is godly and taking is pretty negative. But you might say, oh, wait a minute. Everything in this world is about give and take. You have to take. You don't take, you don't live. And the whole world runs around give and take. The whole creation is, in essence, has an order of giving and taking. So how can you call taking negative? Sir Dessler explains, because it's true. Yes, the world revolves around giving and taking. But there's different ways of giving and different ways of taking. You have your givers and your takers. A taker is someone who primarily takes more than they give, which means that they may work very long hours to make whatever money they can. The amount of effort and time they put into making the money does not fit the amount of money that they make, but that's what they do. In that sense, they are so focused on taking that they spend most of their time on taking, even though the amount of time they're putting into it isn't really worth it, isn't really commensurate with what they're making. And these are people who are taking more. So this is if I didn't say this before, there's a group of takers that they take more than they give. So you have the taker who is the taker that is spending all their time trying to take, but the amount of time they put into it or not makes any sense, which means they're just completely involved in taking. And if you're completely involved in taking, that also can be the kind of a person who actually, again, takes on the account of others. People who cheat, people who charge interest, which means you're basically eating up other people's money without too much work on your part. And then you have the people who take advantage of their workers. All these are people now. Is there a certain amount of giving? There's got to be some amount of giving. You got to pay your workers. You've got to do business with other people. But again, what are you primarily doing? Are you primarily taking or giving? And then for some of those people that are the takers, even their giving is for the purpose of taking. When they give their merchandise to the buyer, why are they doing it? Because of the profit they want to make out of it. You know, you may be a very good salesman, very polite and very nice, and people like you. Well, why are you doing it? Because of the fact that I'm trying to make more out of this. I'm trying to make a profit. I'm trying to make more money. And then Rav Dessler points out that when you're dealing with takers, there's a lot of competition. And competition can be very negative. It can be. It can drive people crazy. It can drive people to an early death. So, yes, giving and taking is a part of the order of the world. But it depends how you fit in. Do you want to be a taker or do you want to be a giver? And a giver, Rav Dessler says, means someone that is spending more of their time giving than taking. And even when they take, the goal of taking is to be able to give more. The goal of taking is to be able to live, to serve Hashem, and to emulate Hashem. A giver takes not to take for themselves, but to take so that they can emulate and serve Hashem. And Rav Dessler says, gives us two, so there's clearly there's business, there's give and take. The question is, how do you approach it? So he gives two illustrations of what would be, of how does the highest form of giving and taking, what does it look like? So he gives two examples. One example comes from the beginning of the Torah, actually early in the creation of the world. At the end of Parsha Bereshis, when the Torah lists the generations between Adam and Noach, which was not necessarily a very positive time in world history, because that's when idol worship developed and idol worship spread. But one person in that line of descendants between Adam and Noach is a man named Chanoch. And Chanoch is described in the Torah as Vayisalech Chanoch es Halekim. Chanoch walked with God, righteous man. What do you do for a living? Says the Medrash, he was a shoemaker. And the Medrash says, it's the Medrash that the Torah brings down. The Medrash says, Chanoch toifer in olam haya, Chanoch sewed shoes, called tfira utfira, and by every stitch, haya miyached yichudim lakono. He would make. I'm not even exactly how to translate these words, but he would make Hashem one. With each stitch that he did, he would be miyached yichudim. He would be proclaiming. He would be making one Hashem's name. That's not a good translation of the words, but I'm not sure exactly how to say. Miyached yichudim can mean he was making. He was each time he put in a stitch, he thought about the oneness of Hashem. That's how you would seemingly translate it. Miyached yichudim. He was making one. He was making Hashem one. He was proclaiming Hashem's oneness, which you could describe that sentence to mean, and that's a typical you'd approach it from those words. Miyached yichudim making Hashem one, from different approaches, let's say, it would mean that while he was stitching, he was thinking of God and thinking about the names of God and the oneness of God. And every stitch, he just went further and further into thinking about the oneness of God. If Dessler brings from Shal Salanter that is a difficult explanation to accept. Because if while you're stitching, you're thinking about other things than your work, then you're not going to do your work too well. So it would seem that wouldn't have been appropriate for Hanoch to do. Therefore, says Rabbi Shal Salanter, when it says that he was making Hashem one with each and every stitch, he wasn't thinking sublime Kabbalistic thoughts. Rather, each stitch that he made was so that the person who's going to receive these shoes should have a good, solid pair of shoes. And in that way, he was making Hashem one. In that way, he was becoming one with God because he was emulating God, the ultimate giver. So Hanoch is not doing anything special, or at least I should say, not doing anything beyond his work. But the point is, he's doing his work. Every single stitch was so that the person receiving the shoes should have a good pair of shoes. That's how he was proclaiming God's oneness. That's how he was becoming one with God. That's an example of a person who is giving more than they're taking. He charged for the shoes. He didn't do it for free. That was his parnasa. That was his livelihood. But when he did it, his thoughts were not, I'm going to make a good money off these shoes. But rather, I am making these shoes for that person. They should have a good pair of shoes. Do I have to take money for it? Got to make a living. I've got to live. If I don't live, I can't give. But that is the person who is focusing on giving more than taking. And their taking is for the purpose of to be able to live, serve God, and give more. Another example that the Mechlio brings, more contemporary example, is a story with the Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim decided that he was going to support his family not through his Torah study or Torah teachings, but rather he was going to open a store. He opened a store. Now, people knew the Chavetz Chaim. They knew how righteous he was. They knew how honest he was. So if the Chavetz Chaim opens a store, that's the store that's going to have the best quality. That's the store that's going to measure things the most honestly and probably even give more than need be because they want to make sure that they're being honest and not hurting anyone. You'll be treated the best. And everybody came to his store. The Chavetz Chaim realized that if everybody's coming to his store, what's going to be with the other storekeepers? So he decided that he's going to limit the hours of his store. But it didn't help. Everyone came during those hours. Chavetz Chaim decided to close his store. Close the store. This was his parnasa. He was trying to take care of himself, but he was still thinking of others at the same time, to the point that he closed the store so as not to affect others. Now, whether we can go ahead and emulate that, that's pretty tough. And to say that if we're doing work, that we're doing it, their whole focus is to give to someone else, and what I take, I just have to take because I got to make a living, that it also may be an ideal or something, a goal to reach. But the point is that whatever it is that we're doing, we should be thinking not only about making a living, but about helping people. We should think about that too. Rabbi Yochanan Lubavitz used to say that a baker who wakes up 3 o'clock in the morning to bake bread can be the biggest Baal Chesed. He can be considered a Baal Chesed, a person who excels in doing kindness, because he can get up and he's baking the bread so that people should have fresh, delicious bread to eat. The money he makes, he's got to make a parnasa, he's got to make a living, he's got to live. We have to strive that even when we're doing things for ourselves to make our living or whatever it may be, to also think about the fact that we're doing this for others and that our focus should be that we're doing for others. And when we do that, the approach is very different to what we're doing. And mentioned before that the Mechtam Eliyahu was talking about competition. Competition can be negative, it can be positive. But people need a drive. It's very hard for people to be altruistic. If you don't have any kind of drive in a certain way to make your money, then you kind of look like the Soviet Union did, where people, it made no difference what they did. What's the difference? They're making the same money. What's the difference what they're doing? People have to have a drive. It falls under what we call mitoch shelo lishma bo lishma. When we start, so to speak, not sincere, we build to being sincere. It may fall under that. People need a drive. People need something to motivate them. And sometimes it has to be something materialistic. At the same time, we have to make sure to keep that in check. And it doesn't preclude us from also thinking about doing what we're doing to benefit other people. So yes, the world has an order, and that order works with giving and taking. Now, no question about it. No question about it. There is giving and there's taking. The question is, though, what kind of giver and what kind of taker you want to be? The form of giving and taking, that is the form of taking that Hashem wants from us, is to be a giver that does more giving than taking, and that we take for the purpose of serving Hashem and to give to others. And all this is something we strive for and grow in. We're not going to be perfect at it. We're not going to all of a sudden become doing everything l'shem shemaim totally for the sake of Hashem. But we can work towards it by thinking about these ideas and by incorporating these ideas. I'm going to conclude with a story. This story comes from Rabbi Leib Lam of Monsey, New York. And he told a story of a senior colleague in Israel who told over that he was still a young man and pursuing his doctorate in philosophy. His professor made the following bold declaration: the Jewish Bible is the source of human rights in the world. That was declaration. The Jewish Bible is the source of human rights in the world. And all of the students diligently wrote it down in their notebooks. But this fellow, the only Jew in the class, promptly approached the teacher and challenged him. Where is it written so in the Jewish Bible? Where is that verse that promises human rights? The professor was a little startled, and he asked his student if he agreed with his claim that the Jewish Bible is the source of human rights in the world. By the way, what are including human rights nowadays, you cannot say that you'll find that in the Bible at all. The student agreed wholeheartedly with this statement, but he was merely curious as to what the source might be. This was a case of the student giving the teacher a homework assignment. And so it was that the professor went to work scanning the Bible and looking for that verse that grants human rights, but his search proved fruitless. A week later, he came back to class and admitted that he could not find a single verse that supported his statement. He also confessed how mystified he was because everybody in the history department, the literature department, and the sociology department agreed with him. How could this be? So he fed the question back to his student. Maybe you have the answer. This budding young Talmud scholar answered as follows. Let's take, for example, one verse that the great Rabbi Akiva refers to as the great general principle in the Torah, and that is, you should love your neighbor as yourself. The implication of that statement is that everyone has a right to be loved. When I walk into a room where you are obligated to love your neighbor, I have a right to be loved. The only difference is that the Torah never came as a bill of rights, but as a bill of responsibilities. This professor was expecting to find a bill of rights, or at least a statement of a bill of rights. No, you're not going to find that statement. And when he looked at love your friend as yourself, he saw it. I'm sure he saw it if he went through the Bible. It didn't work for him. But this student understood that, yeah, there is a right. Human rights come from the Jewish Bible. But you see it not as a bill of rights, but as a bill of responsibilities. We're responsible to love one another. If we're responsible to do that, then you have a right to that. And to me, what this means is the following. If the Torah doesn't mention as a Bill of Rights, meaning the Torah does not say this is what you have a right to demand to take, and the Torah brings this out by saying you shall love, you shall do for others, you shall give, then the main focus is giving. If you come from the perspective of giving, then you understand that there are people who have rights to receive, rights to take. But what's the main thing? The Torah laid it out as giving. Love your friend as yourself. That's where it all starts from. That's the main point. And when that's the main point, our giving and our taking can be elevated and sanctified and truly be what giving and taking is meant to be, where it's all about giving, and through that we emulate and become one with Hashem. Have a wonderful evening.